This week, my guests are very local, and in fact, I went to them. GV Art is on Chiltern Street, just around the corner from Midori House in Marylebone. It's the UK's leading contemporary art gallery, which aims to explore and acknowledge the interrelationship between art and science, and how the areas cross over and inform one another. The gallery curates exhibitions and events that stimulate a dialogue focused on how modern society interprets and understands the advances in both areas, and how an overlap in the technological and the creative, the medical and the historical are paving the way for new aesthetic sensibilities to develop. The current show is called Nature Reserves, and it's a new group exhibition curated by Tom Jeffries. The show seeks to examine human understandings of the natural environment and features work across a rich range of media: photography, printing, sculpture, sound and projection by 12 contemporary artists. I took a stroll around the gallery and started off by talking to Robert Devcic, the owner.
Well, GV Art Gallery London was established in Chiltern Street in September 2008. So this year we're celebrating 5 years in Chiltern Street in Marylebone. The main theme of the gallery is really artists that collaborate with scientists. Not all of our artists exclusively have a scientific background. Some do, some don't, but they generally have a very strong interest in the sciences, and that informs their practice. So I think we're the only gallery that's still dedicated to art and science collaborations. And we work with a lot of interesting artists who sometimes will work with bioart, looking at kind of manipulating life and life systems, and they'll go into laboratories as artists and collaborate and kind of explore and mess around with equipment and environments that normally are only just privileged for scientists. So we've got a really rich mixture of artists, and this exhibition is a good example of how the artists have actually borrowed from science or worked with scientists, and it's Tom Jeffries, a curator exhibition, who came up with this concept for Nature Reserves, and he'll tell you more about that later.
Tell me how you get into running a gallery with that specific remit. It's quite a niche area, isn't it?
Yes, it is. But also, when you're starting off as a gallery, we started off in 2005, and I travelled around the world doing art exhibitions at art fairs, and we're doing 8 or 10 a year. And what we realised is that everyone's trying to do everything for everyone, and nobody was really specialising very much, unless they had a sort of a 2 or 3 well-known artists, and then they would sort of focus on them. But we sort of felt that there was this sort of need to try and sort of stand in a crowd and actually do something that no one else was doing. And having an interest in science and paleontology from a very early age, I was always interested in artists who did a bit more than just decorative arts. So for me, science was always at the core of what I was doing and thinking about. So it made sense to do something that I was very passionate about. And as I was finding more and more artists around the world, whether Australia where I grew up, or in London, or throughout Europe or Africa, it would always be the thing that I always kind of resonated most with me, was the artists who had that huge appetite for more knowledge and science, and how our world is changing constantly because of technology and so on. So it felt right at the time, and years later I still feel that we made the right decision, because now, more recently, a lot of other galleries and a lot of other institutions are now sort of following through with the whole art, science and technology being much more than just a picture on a wall.
Back to this specific exhibition, tell me how Tom got involved.
Well, Tom got involved. It was actually Tom's concept, and he came to me. But he actually, we met Tom in 2008 when he came and did a review of one of our artists, David Marin. And David Marin is an interesting artist in the sense that he's also a paramedic, as well as spending time in the ambulance. He's also spends half his week in the in the studio. And the thing about Tom is that Tom connected with David's work, and we found it really hard to find people in the art world and art critics and writers to engage with David Marin's work, and Tom got it straight away and did a fantastic review. And because of that, we kept in touch with Tom, and when he did an exhibition at the Hoxton Gallery last year, I was very interested to see the show, because I was very keen to see, because I liked his writing, I wanted to see how he curated the exhibition, and then I was very keen to see whether or not we could work with him at a curatorial level rather than just a writer. And then he came up with this concept for this exhibition. I said, fantastic, let's do it. It just, fitted in really nicely. So the other thing that he also did was that we a call to artists. So we were able to actually invite artists, throughout the world to actually propose what work they already have that fitted in with Tom's concept. So it was a really nice way of actually also getting to meet a range of new artists that we hadn't come across before.
That was Robert Devcic, the owner of GV Art. Next, the curator showed me round the work, whilst giving me some background on both himself and the exhibition.
Primarily, I'm an art critic and editor. That's my sort of main day-to-day role. I edit an online magazine called the Journal of Wild Culture, which launched at the tail end of last year, and looks at the sort of intersection between culture and nature. So that covers art and science and all sorts of different things across poetry and features and short stories and photography, and it's quite a broad mix. So that's my sort of day-to-day background. I've done curating before. This is the second exhibition I've curated. The first was called Etc., and that was at Hoxton Art Gallery in 2012, and included work by 5 artists, and that was looking at kind of the mundane, I suppose, and things that are ordinarily overlooked, and trying to kind of examine how they might actually be of interest. And that included work by Laura Cullum, who is also in this exhibition, Nature Reserves at GV Art.
So where did the inspiration for this exhibition come from?
Well, I suppose it was something I've been thinking about for a number of years, I suppose, kind of bubbling away in the background. It's quite hard to pinpoint an exact moment, but if there is one, it would be the work of Liz Orton here. So she got in touch with me to sort of, suggest her work and show me what she'd done, and it just kind of struck a chord really with wild culture and the kind of work I'm doing there. So it's a series of photographs called Splitters and Lumpers, and it was taken in the herbarium at Kew Gardens. So what she's done is kind of looked at what happens is people send in specimens to the herbarium, and before the kind of taxonomists really get to grips with them, they can sit in this particular room for months or years, I think, just sort of waiting to be ordered and waiting for people to decide what they actually are and give them a name and all that sort of thing. So it's a series of works depicting that, and she kind of got these specimens and bundled them together, and they're in kind of bits of newspaper and things, and took these kind of cross-section photographs that have a sort of layered kind of effect. I think an artist friend of hers described it as a mi-foy, which is quite a nice description, and they're just beautiful images, and they really kind of struck a chord, and the idea of kind of order and how we think about nature in terms of scientific ordering and those sort of systems I thought was super interesting.
So her work really inspired the entire exhibition?
Yes, that's right. So it was a real starting point, I think, for the thinking around the rest of the show, and then several of the artists who were in the exhibition were people whose work I knew and I knew I wanted to work with, and I knew that how it would fit within the concept of the show. And there were several others who we'd held an open call, and there were a lot of applications. Actually, I was quite surprised because it is quite a niche topic for an exhibition, but it seemed to strike a chord and seemed to be something that people were thinking about a lot now.
Now, we're standing in front of this piece of work, which looks very much like the pictures we've just been seeing at Liz Orton's work, because it's very layered, but it looks like it's made out of, I don't know, I understand that on the opening night people were sniffing it, because it might have been made out of something that perhaps didn't smell so great. It looks like perhaps it's soil.
Yes, it is soil. A lot of people thought it may have been chocolate, or, as you say, something entirely different. But it is soil. It's shop-bought soil, so you can buy soil in kind of condensed slices for use in gardens and all that sort of thing.
And it's actually from IKEA?
Yes, I think it is, yeah. So the artist is Charlie Franklin, the piece is called Relic, and she works with kind of mundane materials, which is something I find interesting, and she sort of is interested in the interrelationship, I guess, between what is considered natural, so I guess soil, and also artificial, i.e. it coming in these kind of pre-packaged strips, and then it's also got latex and metallic paint kind of applied to it in this quite strange way, so it becomes this very fragile kind of layered structure, I suppose, of kind of little object, and it's presented on this little wall shelf, which gives it a kind of, I don't know, not quite religious, but a sort of devotive offering type feeling, I suppose.
Now, moving on to this piece over here, which I understand took the artist 5 days sitting in a rainy forest, working away on this.
Well, that was just the preparation, really. So the 5 days was spent. So this is Victoria Brown. The 5 days was spent in Epping Forest, near where she actually grew up, studying this particular tree, which is a sweet chestnut tree. That 5 days was a kind of research and drawing process, sitting in the pouring rain. And there's something about artists that seem to push themselves in to do strange things like that. And so that was the drawing process, and then the actual work is a stone lithograph. So the drawing was then transferred to stone which is again a very painstaking process involving rubbing back the stone and then layering over various materials. And the piece depicts, it's kind of exploring the management of woods and forests in the UK and across the world, I guess. And I suppose what's interesting is that we like to think that forests can't manage on their own, that they need to be carefully managed by us. So Epping Forest in particular is an interesting example because many of the trees, and they've studied the roots of these trees, which are in some cases many hundreds of years old and kind of pre-medieval. But what's above ground is just, as the image shows, is just these quite young saplings because they're always coppiced back and then grown again. So it's a strange sort of involvement with nature when we feel we have to manage it in that way. And I guess what's interesting about this work, well, not the only interesting thing, but there's a quite striking red mark through where the coppice has occurred, and you get a sort of sense of warning or alarm or pain or suffering or something from that.
We're on the lower level of the gallery now, and we're looking at a whole lot of big jars with, I can only describe it as kind of icky brown stuff in it.
Yes, icky brown stuff is probably a pretty good description. There's 12 jars of it's kombucha is what it is, which is a yeast bacteria symbiotic colony, and they do look pretty peculiar, I have to say. When I never knew anything about this before, and when they turned up, I was quite surprised, I guess. But anyway, so they're a work by an artist called Hestia Pepe, who's based in South London, and she's interested in a number of things that kind of come together in this work, which is working collaboratively and exploring things that are often overlooked by mainstream science. So kombucha is as I say, a colony, a bacterial colony, and it's popular, as often these things are, in Japan, and it's often used just as a drink. And you feed it with tea and sugar, cold tea and sugar, and if you get the feed right, it tastes just about edible. We had some on the opening night. Hestia was here distributing little thimblefuls of the kombucha, and it was okay. It's quite vinegary. It's not something I'd have to. It tastes very healthy, which is not necessarily a good thing. But the work was produced. So each jar was given to a friend of hers to look after for a period of time and to kind of grow and develop, and then they were brought back together in the gallery. So she's interested in that kind of collaborative way of working. And as I say, modern science has not examined what kombucha are, what they do, so no one actually knows all that much about it, in this country at least, although it is becoming increasingly popular as part of the kind of food scene at the moment. People are getting very into fermenting and all that sort of thing. Places like the Nordic Food Lab and Roganic, just around the corner actually, are interested in this kind of thing, and the starter for this actually came from Hestia's boyfriend Josh Pollen, who works at Blanch and Schock, and he had been researching at Nordic Food Lab, so it kind of comes. You can kind of trace the origins of these things in quite a nice way. And Blanch and Schock are going to be doing the Archiving Tastes dinner later in September.
Well, now let's talk about the Archiving Taste dinner, because there are a number of events that are related to this exhibition, and that's just one of them.
Yes, we've got a few. We've got. I'm doing a curator's tour around the exhibition just to kind of answer a few questions and see what people are interested in, and do whatever it is that people want to hear from me. More interestingly, I'd say there's a panel discussion which is Taxonomize This, which will have two scientists or two people from institutions who are involved in the show and two of the artists in the show discussing systems of ordering how we think about the environment, and also how archives and collections change over time and decay, and how our kind of understanding changes with that. So that's panel discussion on the 10th of September. I think you might want to check that.
And the taste event?
Yes, so that's Archiving Tastes, and that is it's a kind of launch event for a new project called the London Research Kitchen, which is a kind of collaborative venture involving Blanch and Schock, as I say, who are a kind of food design studio, and Crystal Bennis, who's a critic and curator. So they're launching that with Archiving Tastes, which is examining how different varietals have changed over time, I suppose. So it's looking again at kind of how our relationship with the environment changes. So what they'll be doing is presenting dishes that incorporate heritage varieties of a number of different things, for example, tomatoes, with their modern kind of industrially produced counterparts, and allowing people to compare the difference.
So fascinating. Now, you mentioned institutions, and I know that for this particular show you've paired up with a couple of institutions. Tell me about that.
Yes, we've got three institutions involved. There's the South London Botanical Institute, there's the Geology Collections at UCL, and also the Grant Museum of Zoology, who are also part of UCL. So that came about because I was interested in kind of pairing the art pieces with a kind of institutional role and kind of playing with that sort of relationship. Certainly not the institutions kind of providing any kind of underpinning, because I think the works all stand on their own. It was just to sort of see how they'd kind of play off each other, and I think it's been very interesting, and working with institutions was very interesting.
Now, you've got a couple of sound pieces here, although I use the word sound quite loosely in this case. But first of all, tell me a little bit about the artist.
Yes, so this is, they're both by Sally Ann McIntyre, who is a New Zealand-based contemporary artist. She does a lot of interesting work with sound. She runs a kind of radio station which is interested in field recordings and the kind of origins and history of radio itself. And these works are both exploring New Zealand's kind of colonial past and how that has impacted environmentally in terms of species extinction. So the first work is called Huia Transcriptions. I may well be pronouncing that wrong, but it's looking at an extinct bird called the huia, which was indigenous to New Zealand and became extinct through the kind of activities of Victorian collectors who, in their kind of desperate sort of grasp to understand what was going on, decided to kill everything and put it in museums. But what happened was there was a particular Victorian collector who noted down their sounds, the sounds they made. So this has been kind of recreated by Sally. So there's the sound pieces are kind of the sounds of the bird song, and accompanying it is these transcriptions, which are on little bits of card that then go through a music box, and the visitor can... Oh, let's have a go. You can just put them through. And they spell out a little piece of text about the huia, which explains how it got its name. And if I can read it correctly, it's slightly trickily arranged, but it says, the cry, legato and not slurred, was repeated many times, the vocalization sounding like the words, who are you? The cry from which the bird evidently received its name, huia.
Very interesting. Now, she's got another piece, which actually you can't really hear anything at all, but that's the point of it.
Yes, it seems to have confused some people who've come to the gallery, but the idea is that it's a series of recordings of extinct species in one of the big museums in New Zealand. So again, she's looking at the kind of extinction of various species through what we see as kind of scientific knowledge and the pursuit of that and the kind of problems that can arise. So what the actual piece is a series of recordings using something called electric voice phenomenon, which is the kind of technique used by ghost hunters, I guess, to record kind of supernatural sounds. And the sound pieces themselves actually really just consist of Sally kind of giving information about the conditions in which she's recording, humidity levels and sound and light, in a kind of faux scientific way. And then, obviously, because she's recording a stuffed animal, there isn't really any sound other than maybe the curator tapping away or someone walking past. And I think it's quite a powerful evocation of what happens when a species becomes extinct and the silence that follows that.
It's the 25th of June 2010, 11:35 in the morning. I'm in the back room of Te Papa. This is the Laughing Owl. The temperature is 20.2 in the cabinet and the humidity is 58%. Note there is an audible hum from the air conditioning in this recording.
We're now standing in front of a couple of pieces which are photographs of sort of desiccated insects, really. What's the story behind this?
This is an interesting one. So this is the work of an artist called Helen Piner, who I actually came across her work in Australia when I first visited Australia would have been 2008, I think. And then I remember coming to this gallery and seeing those works again, and being amazed. And I suppose that's one of the things that got me involved in GV art, and being interested in what they were doing. And this is a new series by her. It was produced at the tail end of last year. It's called The Life Raft. And she came across a cabinet which was on sale, and it was full of this kind of insect collection, Victorian insect collection. And no one really knew anything about it. No one knew where it had come from. And it's in, as the photos show, not the greatest state of repair. And so the series is of, I think it's sort of 17 photographs, and they show the kind of gradual destruction and decomposition of the collection. So some of it is in relatively good condition, and you can tell, there's insect wings, crabs. There's a lot of crabs in the collection, butterflies pinned, and then the ones here in the exhibition I chose because they were a bit more. Some of them are completely unidentifiable. These are sort of halfway between the two, and I liked that kind of liminal state, I guess, between recognition and collapse. And what emerges most clearly, and what seems to have stood the test of time, is the labelling, which you can still read in this kind of very elaborate handwriting. So the labelling kind of hints at what would have been there. And again, it's in this very kind of elaborate scientific Latin, and there's still bits and bobs. So you can sort of piece together where the collection might have come from. So there's names here: New Forest, Ramsey, and Cambridge. So they're clearly specimens collected from the UK, and I think there's some from Europe as well. But no one knows who collected them or what it was used for. I mean, it looks like a private collection, but it's hard to say.
And it surfaced in Australia.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. I mean, no one really knows how it got there either. So there's all these things, the kind of stories there that you can kind of guess at, but you have to make it up, really.
We're now standing in front of some really exquisite pieces, and they are of weeds, really, but there's so much more to it. If you'd like to describe how these are made.
It's a hard one to get across without looking at, because they are extraordinary in terms of the level of detail and the precision involved in the production process. But so they're a series of works by an artist called Laura Cullum, and I came across her work in 2009 when she was in Saatchi New Sensations exhibition in London, and I've worked with her before. She was in the show that I curated before, and I've always loved her work because it's so quiet and still and calm and very, very precise in a way that I haven't really seen in that many other contemporary artists. So this is a series. This is an installation piece, and it's 12. The number 12 runs through the exhibition in quite a strange way, but that's just a coincidence. So it's 12 paper sculptures of weeds that were collected from her garden. She lives in Oxfordshire, I think. And so she collects the weeds and then simply makes a reproduction on a kind of painstakingly precise level of detail of those weeds. So there's 12 paper versions, and they're made out of the paper from till receipts. So she's interested in kind of ideas of the mundane. So it's weeds, which people normally are trying to get rid of. It's till receipt paper, which is not important and is always thrown away and scrumpled up. And just showing that, through a sort of artistic process and through a kind of spending time with something and skill, you can produce something that is completely different from those materials, I suppose.
And she doesn't use glue or anything. I mean, this is made from one piece of paper and with incredible detail.
Yes, she's pretty precise in setting herself specific rules that she then works to. I guess it's kind of imposing a sense of control over the artistic process and limiting her own kind of capabilities, I suppose. And she always, or so far, has always worked on this quite small, intimate scale, which I think is interesting. And she produces some paintings and drawings and these paper sculptures, which are in the exhibition. And she's made the boxes that they sit in as well, and they're quite extraordinary feats of engineering.
So finally, to conclude, your last words on this exhibition in terms of its whole archival content.
Well, I suppose I was interested in the kind of how archives work, and that's something I've always been interested in terms of storing knowledge and how our understanding of, in this case, the natural world is altered by how we organise that knowledge and how it's stored and how well it's stored. And I suppose what's sort of interesting is the archiving of the show itself, in that we produced an online catalogue, and obviously when the exhibition is taken down in mid-September, all that will be left of the show is the catalogue and the images from that, and I guess reviews that people have written. So there's a kind of nice sense that the show will linger on in a strange sort of way online and in people's memories.
That was Tom Jeffries, editor of the Journal of Wild Culture and curator of Nature Reserves, the exhibition currently on show at GV Gallery on Chiltern Street in Marylebone, London.